All right, we are going to continue on with the next section in our book. We are doing section 4.10. And a lot of this should actually be review, which is nice, because we're going to be talking about integer multiplication. And the big thing that we need to talk about, is multiplying negative and positive numbers and how that results. So again, we're going to be talking about the set of integers, which is different than what we've been working with before. And remember, if we build that set real quick, we can go -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, and we put those little dots to show that the set kind of goes off infinitely in both directions. So we're going to be talking about multiplying numbers. So for example, I can write 3 times 7 is 21. And there's a couple of words that we need to remember when we multiply. These two words here are both called factors, and we end up with a product. Almost like you're making something and you end up with the product. So the key here is looking at those factors and seeing how we do things. Now, I'm going to assume, I hope correctly, that we all know how to multiply numbers at this point. But the big difference is going to be multiplying negative numbers when they're in our combination of regular numbers. For example, instead of multiplying 3 times 7, what happens when I multiply 3 times -7? -3 times 7, -3 times -7, and 3 times 7. These are all different ways to write a potential problem, and they have different ways to solve. Now, our key for multiplying these numbers goes like this. Whenever I multiply a positive times a negative, I end up with a negative. So I'm going to end this with -21. A negative times a positive is also a negative. A negative times a negative, they kind of are opposites of each other, and I end up with 21. And I should know by now that a positive times a positive is 21. If I was going to write rules for this, if I was going to simplify it even more, I could say that a positive times a negative equals a negative. And I'm just purely looking at the signs. A negative times a positive equals a negative. Negative times a negative, just like when we were adding, they kind of cancel out. And just like we've always done, a positive times a positive equals a positive. So this is kind of a key to look at what we're doing when we're multiplying. Now, occasionally, we're going to need to multiply even more than just two things. And this rule kind of follows. We can just do each piece separately. Or you can count up the total number of negatives and positives and see which kind of wins. That's what I do sometimes too. Let me show you an example. Oops, I was a little bit off there. Sorry about that. Oh, and I'm blurry. Let's see if I can fix that real quick. There we go. A little bit better. All right. Now, so we were talking about multiplying larger groups of numbers. So, for example, say I am going to take a look at three times -2 times -3. Now, in this case, the question is my answer going to be positive or is my answer going to be negative? What I can do is I can simplify this in steps and kind of look at it in a deeper sense. So I can take these two negatives and I can multiply just the signs against each other and simplify them out, because I know a negative times a negative is a positive. So if I want, I can rewrite this like that, because now I've gotten rid of the negatives. I haven't changed the total problem at all. I can just see easily now that this is going to be positive. And then I can do 3 times 2, which is 6, and 6 times 3, which is 18, to get my answer. Just like in here, I can even look separately. If I cover this up, I can say -2 times -3 That's going to be positive. So kind of like this group, I know is going to be a positive, times this group, which is a positive. So I know positive times positive is going to be what I want. Let's take a look at another example. If you feel like you get it from this point, go on ahead. I'm going to do two more. This case, let's look at -5 times -5. So in this case, again, this one looks really easy because it recalls exactly this example, or this little possibility up here. We have our negative times a negative equals a positive. So I can simplify that and just write it as 5 times 5 if I want to. And that is obviously 25. And it kind of screams out at me for my answer. Let's take a look at one more example. Lastly, let's take a look at this. We're going to have -2 times -3 times -10. All right, so in this case, what I can do is I can solve this a couple of ways. What I would do is I would simplify part of it first, or think of, okay, a negative times a negative is going to be a positive. So I can write it as this, -2 times 3 times 10, right? Then I can write, I see I have a negative times a positive, and now that I'm down to two numbers, I can see that a negative times a positive, turns out to be negative. So 30 times -2 is -60. Makes sense? It should. The idea is to simplify it down, and then you can kind of count up and see, and you'll be able to find some patterns in doing this. Shouldn't be too bad. Good luck.